Hey, so welcome to another Run Wild with Us. Ask Us Anything. I am Lisa Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor of Running Wild, which includes Running Wild Press and Rise Press. And we are here with you once a week, typically, which is usually on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, to answer any kind of questions you have. So, usually, folks ask us questions around publishing, creative writing, marketing of books, reviews, submissions, all that kind of stuff. You're welcome to ask anything like that. Typically, what happens is you go ahead, you pop your questions in the comments section. I then repeat your question and then I answer it. So, we were not with you last week. It's not a big deal, guys. Seriously, all you got to do is just go ahead. You can actually go back to past posts of our Ask Me Anything or Ask Us Anything. And I go back and I check them out for those said questions. And then I answer those questions in future versions. So, yeah, that's basically it. If you don't ask any questions, then what'll end up happening is I'm going to just start talking about whatever the hell I feel like it because I can. So, yeah, there you go. I do actually. So, one thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit is vaccinations, which has nothing to do with submissions or storytelling or publishing, but I would really heavily encourage everyone to please go ahead and get your vaccination. I know that there's like a ton of stories out there around, um, you know, vaccines and if they're effective and all that. I got to tell you guys, really, I still remember when COVID first came out, and I personally did a bunch of research on pandemics, past history of pandemics, how and when they were, generally speaking, ended, when, what were the results, and so on. And historically, really, pandemics end because of vaccinations, because countries decide that, hey, you know what? Let's do this, and that way we have at least some type of something against it. So against the virus, I you know 18 months is the fastest we have ever had a vaccine available. It's amazing. I personally got the Pfizer vaccine. Of course, I had side effects. Well, no shit, right? I mean, it's a vaccine. This isn't like magic. And it doesn't mean that you can't actually get COVID. It just means that if you get COVID, then, it's like getting a vaccine in the beginning of the flu season. It doesn't mean you're not going to get the flu. It means you're going to have lesser um, side effects associated with it if you do get the flu. So just please, guys, go do your homework, do your research, find out the history of pandemics and vaccines and so on, and please just go get it. Save yourself, save your friends, save loved ones. Just freaking do it. So, okay, that's my soapbox for right now. I also have two cats. Totally complete shift in topic, and they're named the Master and Margarita. For some reason, Margarita has decided Master is like the demon incarnate, and so whenever he's around, she freaks out. That said, they also both like to join me, so you may see some little furry friends. This here is Master, who I don't actually perceive to be the devil incarnate, but all good. But this year's Master, he is typically a love bug, and they both, like I said, like to join and kind of hang out for a little bit. Okay, so let me think about this. Some recent questions that we've gotten around stories and submissions. So for Running Wild Press, we actually got a full slate for our catalog for 2022. So we're looking now at submissions for 2023. For Rise, we are actually still going through submissions for 2022. And then once we're done looking at submissions for 2022 or feel as though we've got a decent enough slate, then we're going to start looking for 2023. Our goal right now is for both Running Wild and for Rise to have a total catalog per year of 25 titles. That may not sound like a lot. It's actually quite a lot. And uh, for, I believe, 2022, we're pretty close to that 2025 number, if not at or potentially exceeding that 2025 number. And then for Rise, we have currently 3 books, well, actually 5 books, because there are 3 titles that are actually fiction, and then we have a short story anthology and a novella anthology that we'll be publishing. So we will be looking for up to potentially 25 total titles for Rise. I'll be honest, I recommended to our acquisitions editor for Rise not to necessarily go for the full 25 in the first full year. The reason for that is, you really kind of want to get a sense of the stories and how long it takes and what the process is and what we need to do. And you want to get everything kind of up and running and rolling before you go to whatever your maximum capacity is going to be. So I actually recommended that we only publish, 10 to 15 total, if that. So we probably won't actually do 25 and 22, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do increase the number for 2023. Okay. We are currently in the middle of reviewing short stories and novellas for Rise. That process is ongoing. And as we decide on the ones that we are going to publish as a part of the anthology, those authors will be notified. I have noticed that there's a new theme going on where people are privately emailing me. I'm going to tell you now, I'm probably not going to respond to you. I've got far too many emails. There's no way that I can get through all of these personal requests for either submission, reviews, feedback on a review, personal review of submissions, and so on. We actually have 2 acquisition editors for Running Wild, 1 acquisition editor for Rise. And although I do admit that I am still part of the review process, I am not necessarily the final say on what titles that we publish. The reason for that is I'm vetting from an overall quality and type of story perspective. And I actually prefer that our editors select books that they're passionate about in order to publish and in order to work on. So although a story might be great and it may be fabulous and I may love it and our editors may love it, but if nobody comes forward and says, you know what, Lisa, you know what, guys, I really want to work on this, then we don't publish it. So it's not a personal thing. It's not a quality thing. It's just simply, again, we really want our editors to feel really passionate about those stories that they work on. So if you email me and you ask me, hey, I submitted you my memoir, I'd really want to know if you're going to publish it, I'm probably not going to respond. If it's a memoir, if it's a novella, if it's a short story, if it's a fiction, if it's a short story collection, whatever it is, I'm not going to respond. So I used to, I just simply don't have the time. And again, I don't have the final say in what stories we're actually going to be publishing. It is a collaborative effort. It is a combination of me, our acquisition editors, as well as our editors who are actually doing the editing, who make those decisions. So I apologize, but yeah, that's how it is. I've gotten some people who've emailed me 2, 3, 4 times. We get thousands of submissions, guys. I'm sorry, I just can't. It's just not physically possible. So with that, some things that you want to think about when you are submitting, not just to us, but to any publication. Make sure that you go through and you understand that publication's mission, vision, the kind of stories they're looking for, that when you are submitting to them, you are submitting everything they're asking for. Some publications will ask you for a synopsis. Some publications will ask you for a marketing plan. So whatever it is, right? If someone's asking you that they want the submission to be done uh, in an Arial font with a 12 point, they're probably not asking because they actually give a shit if it's an Arial and 12 point. They're asking because they want to see if you can follow directions and if you're collaborative. We don't have any kind of request, like not quite at that kind of level, but be aware of that, because when you are submitting a piece, as with any interaction, you're basically informing that individual or that group or that company of what your style is and what your preferences are. So again, just you want to be aware of how you're coming across when you do a submission. Again, it's not just about, are you a great storyteller? Is it a great story? Can you formulate a sentence? It's also about, are you someone that's, relatively easy to work with? Um, are you someone who wants to work with a publisher? Are you open to suggestions? Are you open to recommendations, right? Because as a dear friend of mine, Jonathan Mayberry, says, the very first and second and third and fourth feedback or recommendation that he was provided in terms of rules of creative writing was, don't be a jackass, don't be a jackass, don't be a jackass. And you might be surprised by the number of people who, I know they probably feel like they're being protective of their narrative, of their story, of something that is an extension of themselves, but it is really not beneficial to anybody to come across as a jackass and not be open to working with someone. So guys, really, especially if you get feedback and you have that immediate gut visceral response of like, fuck you. Yeah, that's probably a red flag that that the feedback, it hit home in some capacity. So instead of responding with a fuck you or some other comparable jerky response, I really recommend that instead, just do me a favor, take a breath, take a moment, think about the feedback that you've gotten, really kind of digest it, and then respond and ask for clarification if there's something about it that really is striking home. Don't, again, coming back and saying, well, this is how I write. That's not going to benefit anybody, right? Because remember, you're not getting feedback. Let's take 100 steps back. One, if somebody picked your piece, they picked it because they liked it, right? They liked the voice. They liked the story. They wanted this. They wanted to see this get in front of readers. So remember that, right? If your piece is picked by a publisher, that's why. They want you to have fans. One. Two, if they're coming back with feedback, they're not coming back with feedback because they were like, I really want to fuck with this guy. So, I'm just going to throw out shit. I'm going to make stuff up. Just whatever. See how they come back. Yeah, no, that's not actually what happens. Typically, the feedback is based on, well, hopefully, right? If the editor's more established, they're going to give you feedback to help you strengthen your storytelling. That's really what it's about, or that's really what it should be about. If they do come back with feedback that you're like, oh my God, this is the kind of stuff that I'd see, when I was a beginning writer, that's okay. You can go back. You can ask questions about why they gave you that feedback. And if you can justify why you did something a specific way, then that's awesome. You have every right to do that. Again, though, if your response is more of a visceral, like, screw you, I don't give a shit what you say, it's probably, again, not a very productive way to respond to the feedback that you're getting or have gotten from that editor. So again, I'd say 99, hopefully, percent of the time, when you do get that feedback from those editors, it is intended to help you strengthen your storytelling and strengthen the story that's in front of them. So cool. Also remember, every publication has different rules in terms of their time in terms of response to submissions. Some, they'll tell you, hey, if we don't get to you in like 6 months, so well, tough crap. That's not us, but there are ones who have that kind of feedback. Don McIntyre asks, what do you think is worse, a bad book or a mediocre one that with a bit more effort could have been a great one? I'm with you on vaccinations, by the way. Yay. Okay, so a bad book or a mediocre one with a bit more effort. So I'm not honestly sure which one's worse. I have a really bad habit of like, if we get a submission that's good, not great, I'll put it in the maybe pile. And what I mean by good, not great, typically there's something about the story, it doesn't quite catch the reader, so to your point about being mediocre. And a lot of times it's not so much whether the book it's a bad book or a mediocre one. If you're looking at it prior to it actually being published, it's more around, is the author someone who's going to be easy to work with? So what I mean by that is, we actually, I think it was like 2-3 months ago, we acquired a title that we weren't sure about. It had a lot of good bones. It could really use some fleshing out. There were some parts to the storytelling that could use some strengthening. But back to the thing about, if an editor believes in it, right? We had an editor who really believed in it, but his big question was, is this guy going to be collaborative or not, right? Because if he's not, then there's no point in acquiring it, because if he's going to be hard to work with, then we're not going to be able to get it to the level that we think it could be. So the editor had asked for us to have like a group meeting with this author and get a feel for him in terms of, what is he open to doing in terms of revision, and is he open to certain recommendations and that kind of thing. And it was actually an amazing conversation. The author turned out to be incredibly open to recommendations, very open to suggestions, had been craving a more collaborative experience with an editor. And so it was like a dream come true. And from what I've heard so far from the editor, they're having an amazing time working together. So I think a lot of it really just comes down to if that author's willing to work with the editor. Now, if you're talking about in terms of like a book that's already published, which is worse, a bad book or a mediocre one that could have been a great one? Man, that is hard. That is so hard. Again, in my experience, what I have found, well, a bad book, that's kind of it's a little subjective, right? In terms of people's perspectives, in terms of what's a good book versus what's a bad book. A lot of people hated, books like I Am Legend or The Martian. I don't know. There's like tons of examples, but yet they did incredibly well at the market. And like, I bought those books because I wanted to find out why people thought they were so amazing. And it, The Martian was actually really well written, I thought. I Am Legend, it was a really interesting story. It was different, right? It was a different take on a couple of older uh, storytelling styles. So that part is, like I said, it's a little bit relative. A mediocre one. Um, wow. So that one. All right. I'm gonna say some stuff that is gonna might end up being controversial, and that's totally fine. Um, what I've discovered in the last 5 going on 6 years of having Running Wild, a lot of times what happens when a story is mediocre, like it actually gets to market and it's mediocre, it's usually because the editor and the author didn't quite connect when they were going through that revision process. So what I mean by that is, some like the way the editor was providing feedback, or the way the recommendations that were being made didn't quite resonate with the author. And so when the author was making the changes, it didn't really hit the nail on the head, right? It really missed the mark in terms of what was intended. In other cases, and I hate to say this, we've encountered some authors who were like, well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the only purpose of an editor is to do proofreading. No, no. If you're an author or you're a writer and you're watching this and you have that perspective, I'm going to recommend that you really kind of take 1,000 steps back, because the real purpose of an editor is to help make sure that your storytelling is the absolute best that it can be. And we haven't encountered some writers who they had been working on their stories for so long that when they actually got an offer for publication, they thought, I'm done. That's it. No more. I don't have to do anything else. And when they started working with their editor, they were really, really, so back to don't be a jerk, don't be a jerk, don't be a jerk. Yeah, they never got that memo. And they really fought the editor on making certain changes. And that's, in my opinion, that's how a book becomes mediocre. It's those kinds of situations. And I don't know how to fix that, to be honest. I mean, we had a couple of instances like that. And when we tried to help the author in terms of getting it to that next level, the author just was not open to it. And we did publish the books. But anyway, we were fully aware that it may not do very well, especially not from a more like a writing community or a publishing community perspective, because the author just really wasn't open or understanding of the feedback that was being provided. Now, mind you, I'm not saying editors are always right. I've known several instances where editors were, back to my comment about, more junior. So maybe it's someone, they've read a lot and they've studied, but they're still navel gazing. In other words, when they're reading stories for potential publication, they're looking at it in terms of revision. They're still reading it as if they were reading their own work, and looking at it with that lens. So there are some people who are like incredible at description, and so when they read a piece and it's not necessarily really elaborative in terms of description, they then mark give that writer negative marks because they don't describe the same way as that editor. Well, that's wrong. That doesn't make any damn sense, right? Versus reading a story from a narrative perspective and understanding that, old school storytelling chapters had to have a full arc, as if each chapter was its own short story. Modern storytelling, oftentimes chapters are vignettes and they end with a cliffhanger. Very common technique. So if an editor hasn't read a lot and hasn't really studied a lot of different techniques, they may actually give negative marks to an author who's using more modern techniques in terms of storytelling. So, like I said, I'm not saying that every author is or every editor is 100% right. But I'm just saying that when I've read mediocre stories and I've published stories that I thought could have been much more gorgeous than they were, oftentimes it was because there was a disconnect between the author and the editor in terms of storytelling or the creative writing craft or whatever, like that, all that kind of stuff. So that was a really, really, really long response to your question, but I hope that answers your question. Um, yeah. So we are almost at that halfway mark. For those of you who are watching and you just joined us, or you're watching this after the fact, I am Lisa Kastner. I am the founder and executive editor of Running Wild, which consists of Running Wild Press and Running Wild LLC. We've been around since 2016. We have been blessed with 2 books named Best of 2019, 2 books named Best of 2020 by Kirkus Reviews. We've had several starred reviews. We've had a few Amazon bestsellers. We've published some amazing, amazing stories. And, we started because in reality, I knew so many amazing storytellers who, when I asked them, like, hey, where can I go read your stuff? They said, dude, I can't get published. And I was floored because in my little pea brain, if you can write a great story, then that means that story is going to get published. And I was quickly edified, or it was clarified for me, that in reality, that is not how publishing works. And so I decided, after doing a whole lot of I spent about let me think about this. I met my husband in 2012 and we started Running Wild in 2016. So I spent 4 years, no joke, I spent 4 years doing research around by interviewing agents and editors and folks from major publishers, right, from like the big 4 or 5, whatever it is now, and asking them, how do you decide on what you're going to publish, and have you ever passed on a story and that you knew was great, but you thought, dude, there's no way I'm going to be able to publish this? And everybody said yes. Every single person said yes, and gave specific examples. And some people had really emotive stories around them having to reject a story that later on, potentially went on for and became a huge bestseller. There are tons and tons and tons of examples like that. So that told me that there's a big gap in the publishing industry and how we're actually acquiring stories and deciding on what to put in readers' hands. And that's what started first Running Wild Press. And after a couple of years, in reality, when Black Lives Matter became quite prominent in the news, someone had approached me online and said, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? What are you going to do about equality? And I thought, okay, that's an interesting question. Let me do, again, me, Queen of Research, let me do my homework and find out what's going on. And that's when I discovered that between 1950 and I believe 2018, 95% of all books that have been published by the Big 5 in the United States were written by Caucasians. And I was shocked. I mean, seriously shocked. And that same bias actually exists behind the scenes. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the number of people who are doing the acquisitions, who are making the decisions, who are in charge of production, who are in charge of editory, fabulous, editing, who are in charge of marketing, all of that, again, around 95% are all people who would self-identify as Caucasian. And I thought, oh, this makes no sense whatsoever, especially when you look at the fact that by, I believe it's 2040, the majority of the US population will be non white. So that means that, I mean, let's face it, we all are attracted to people who are in stories that are similar to us or that resonate with us in some capacity. It does not have to be race, but culture, um, whatever your political affiliation is. It could be anything, right? And so that means that there's a huge market that is being missed out on. So just from a business perspective, it doesn't make any sense, let alone from a if you believe that those creative endeavors should typically reflect the cultural norms or social norms. So anyway, with that, we started Rise. And Rise was originally initiated with an amazing woman, Andrea Johnson, who came forward and said, well, if you think that's bad, if you think 95% is bad, you should really look at the number of genre stories that are written by people of color and other underrepresented groups. And when I looked into it, she was right. It's something insane. Like, I don't know, around those same years, 1950 to 2018, it's something like less than 1%. I mean, just pure insanity as far as I'm concerned. So with Andrea's just wherewithal and genius, we started Rise. Then, good for Andrea, she actually is an author herself, and her first book had come out, and it started doing really well. And so she was like, Lisa, I love Rise, but I need to stay focused, and I really want to focus on my writing career. So I said, I totally get it. God bless you. And we then moved on, and the 3 novels, No Molasses and Rum, Broken Petals, and The Durbar's Apprentice, were all selected by Andrea originally. So those are the titles that we are publishing in 2022 under Rise. And for a little while, we had another amazing author and editor, Chris Major. We actually published, I believe it was one of his short stories previously. So Chris and I worked together quite a bit on acquiring and looking at new titles to continue forward with Rise. And then Chris also decided that he wanted to, again, focus on his creative writing career. He's actually in grad school right now, so good for Chris. And now we are here with Mona, and Mona is another amazing author who primarily does poetry and memoir. And she is currently in the middle of going through all of the amazing submissions that we've been getting to select what we will be publishing again in 2022 and 2023. We actually also, in the last couple of months, brought on board a couple of readers to kind of help us as well in going through all these titles and submissions. So again, if you do submit to us, please be patient. Typically, if you get a rejection letter, you're going to get a rejection before you're going to get an acceptance. So what I mean by that is, when we go through stories, when we go through submissions, we will first identify those that need work or they don't really fit into our wheelhouse. Like, it's not really within the kind of stories that we publish. So we'll reject those first. If it's a story that we think has a lot of merit and there's a lot of potential to it, then we'll hold on to that in reality. So we've got some stories, or in the past we've had stories we had for over a year. And what we ended up doing is going to our editors and asked them if any of them were interested in working on the piece. And if no one came forward and said yes, then we ended up rejecting it. So again, if you submitted work to us and it's been a couple of months, please be patient. We are going through them. Again, we're a small press. We all work really hard. We all have at least 2 jobs, if not 3 or 4. So we do our darndest. We do our best. So again, thank you for your your patients. Okay, what else would you guys want to hear about? What kind of information do you want? Remember, we've actually done a lot of work as well in terms of like social media and like marketing and all that. So if you want some help with that, that's great. Um, so yeah. Don McIntyre asks, who pays for the Kirkus reviews, or does RW and the author split the cost? That's a great question. So again, I'm going to be overly candid. One, we actually do submit to multiple reviewers, both industry and like those that are more focused on genre. So, excuse me, got like, let's say if it's like a book blogger who's focused on thrillers and the story has like a thriller element to it, we'll send it to them for their review. So that means some books get a lot more play that way than others. For the actual Kirkus reviews, typically, so every industry reviewer has a bias. I'm just putting that out there. You know, some of them are more preferable to literary. Some are more have a bias toward middle grade. Some have a bias toward young adult. Whatever the case may be. So depending on what is that leaning for that reviewer, will depend on whether we send it to them or not. So Kirkus actually does have leanings towards certain types of stories, and so we just when we don't send all of the books that we publish to Kirkus, only those that we think will most likely get a decent review from them, and we pay for it. There have been instances where we've had authors who insisted that they get a Kirkus review and they paid for their own review, and that's totally fine. There is nothing wrong with that at all. Either way, you know, we would back leveraging the more positive aspects of that review. Sadly, to date, we've been correct when we recommended an author not go for a Kirkus review because we didn't think that it would resonate with the reviewers at Kirkus. And when the review came back, we were sadly correct. So, but yeah, anybody can actually submit. An author can submit it. The editor or the publisher can submit it something to Kirkus. There are several industry reviewers, and where you can pay to have your book reviewed. None of them will actually. None of them will tell you that you're going to get a good review, because then they would lose all credibility, right? But what they will do is they will highlight the positive aspects of that story within the review. So then, you know, you can kind of blurb that positive aspect. So what some companies recommend, some distributors and so on, is to actually, if you are a publisher or you are an author and you're sending your book out to reviews, to send them to multiple industry reviewers, because then that way, like, if the majority provide a positive review to the story, then libraries and, you know, major bookstore chains and like Costco and all, they'll say, you know, Kirkus and this one and this one and this one all said this was fabulous. That means it's fabulous. We're going to pick it up. It also gives a lot more like firing power for the actual salespeople of the distributor of that publication or of that press, of that publisher, to bring forward those books to major chains, because they can say, look, you know, LA Times said this was amazing. Look, Kirkus said this was amazing. Look, these guys all said this was amazing. So just some stuff to think about. I actually highly recommend, whenever somebody is going to have their books published, whether it's a small press, a mid-sized press, a major press. Go do your homework. Look up who does reviews, book bloggers, and so on, for books that were similar to yours, or for books within that theme or within that genre. And then, dude, go send it the frig out. When it's ready, when you feel like it's like 95% there, go and send that puppy out for reviews. Take the chance and see. The more places you send it out to, the more buzz you can create. And you want that. You want that buzz. You want people talking about your stories. So go for it. And, not all, this is actually really interesting. I was talking the other night to Regina Yao, who is in charge of the Pixel Project. And we are actually publishing Giving the Devil His Due. The first edition is, I believe, September 1st of this year. And it's a reprint of a ton of amazing, amazing short stories, horror short stories, with that theme of giving the devil his due. And it all benefits anti-domestic violence. The Pixel Project is all around stopping domestic violence. And so anyway, Regina and I were talking, and she was saying how she was shocked that when she's been talking to authors who are with major publishers, a lot of them say, oh my God, you guys do so much more marketing, so much more social media, so much more publicity than my publisher does. And you being the Pixel Project. And, Regina was like, I don't get it, right? I mean, all this it does is it's a lot of planning. But I don't know why the major publishers aren't doing this. And the reality is it's viewed as an investment. So, in order to, it costs money to pay for a publicist, to pay for a lot of times industry reviews. Dawn, as you and I just talked about, it costs money. And a lot of times I think the vast majority of books that are published don't earn out. So what I mean by that is they don't actually make they don't earn back the amount of money that was invested, both in upfronts for the author, paying for the editor, paying for the formatting, paying for cover design, paying for even the most basic of publicity and marketing. And because they don't earn out, that's why the publishers typically, knowing that most don't earn out, that's why typically they won't invest in dedicating, say, a publicist or dedicating somebody to doing that kind of work. Now, excuse me, the irony of all of this is that the reality is most people aren't going to buy a book because they don't know it exists. And they won't know it exists because there wasn't a lot of publicity. There wasn't a lot of social media activity. There wasn't necessarily a campaign around it. So the fact that the author, those authors who do take the time to work with a publicist or even create their own social media campaign to help sell their books, that's why they typically do better. So I don't know. It's just kind of a little bits of knowledge or information that you may or may not find interesting. I personally think it's kind of funny, but hey, Blather. Okay, so we are almost at the 15 minutes away from being at the end of this live stream, which you may be watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. I'm Lisa Kastner, and I am the founder and executive editor of Running Wild, which consists of Running Wild Press and Rise Press. I am here every week, pretty much, to talk to you about whatever you want. You can ask me anything. Usually it's around publishing, it's around creative writing, it's around submissions, it's around, how do book reviews work, how does whatever you want. You can ask whatever you want. All you do is when you ask the questions, you just go ahead and you pop it in the comments section and I will respond. If you are watching this and it is not 5 p.m. Pacific time or 8 p.m. Eastern time, it's not a big deal. It's all good. All you gotta do is go ahead, still pop your questions in the comments section. I then do go back and I read those questions during the course of the week, and then I will respond to them in a subsequent week. Now, so sometimes I am going to end this earlier than 6 p.m. Pacific time or 9 p.m. Eastern time, just because I do have some other things that I have on my plate that I have to do. But if we are having, again, there's plenty of questions, then I will do my best to stay on and up until, again, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. If you've got questions actually, and that you don't have for me, but maybe you have questions for our acquisition editors, or you want to ask questions of our authors, you can still go ahead and pop the questions in the chat, because what I'll do is I'll take it back to my guys and see what they have to say. And, maybe they'll join me. That would be great. I'd love that. If not, it's not a big deal. I'll let you know what their responses are. One recommendation I actually do give a lot of new authors is I am like a research fiend. It's so sad. I really love doing my homework, no matter what the topic is. Seriously. I mean, just me earlier talking about the fact that I didn't even start Running Wild until I had done like 4 years worth of research. I mean, seriously, I went to conferences, I went to workshops, and I, like basically waited until a happy hour or whatever and got an editor or a publicist or an agent who's like among the top on the side with a gin and tonic or a wine or something. So that they would be as open as possible and ask them questions around acquisition and how they pick the stories they pick, and have they ever turned down stories that they were like, oh my God, this is so good, but dude, I just can't, I can't come up with the business plan. I can't come up with the business justification to purchase it. I spent 4 years doing that kind of mess and finding out, like how much does it cost to publish a book, and what does that look like, and what does social media look like, and what does PR look like, and what does marketing look like, and what kind of tools are out there, and all that. I mean, all that mess. I did all that stuff. So I really recommend that if you are a writer, that you go ahead and you do your homework and you research the small presses, research the large ones. I've known plenty of authors, believe it or not, who went to Columbia's writing program, or maybe Yale or Harvard or Warren Wilson, right? And they originally were writing more along the literary lines, and then at some point decided, what, I want to make a lot of money, and they went and did their homework on like what were the top books that sold, and if there were any themes among them, and started writing books like that. And guess what? They were right. They ended up being huge, doing incredibly well. So, I really think you should sit down and figure out, what is it you want, right? Do you want to write just stories that you personally loved writing? Do you want to write stories that you personally would love reading? That's not always the same thing. Do you want to make a lot of money? Are you more about, I don't know, changing the world, right? Whatever it is, figure out, what is your personal objective? What do you personally want to do with your life? What do you personally want to do with your storytelling? And then find other people who are in the market, who are doing what you want to do, and who have been really successful at it, and do it. Do the same damn thing. It is the easiest way to find success. Seriously. Mind you, I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying it's, it's like, oh, one day you're a writer and, you're floundering, and the next day, holy shit, you're suddenly like this huge bestseller. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the easiest way to find success is to figure out what success you want, what success looks like for you, finding other people who have had that type of success. And then if you can, interview them, ask them how they did it, or just, research it, find out from interviews or whatever it is, how they did what they did and replicate it. And then you too will most likely find a very similar success. So I recommend doing that. And when I say that, it also includes doing stuff like, you know, researching the publishers that you're submitting to. Because I noticed a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this as well. It's like, oh my God, somebody just sent out a call out for submissions. Oh, I've got a short story sitting in my back pocket. I really want it published, and so I'll send it out. Yeah, no. It's probably smarter to actually research the kind of stories that they do publish, and find out if that way you find out if the story that you want that you have sent to them actually fits along the lines of what they typically publish. And if it doesn't, and it is a publication that you're really adamant about being published by, then you may want to research again, read about some of the more recent stories that they've published, and then submit pieces that are along similar lines and see how they're received. Um, Again, it's the best way that, and the easiest way that if you really want to get your name out there to do so. All right. So with that, I actually think I'm going to end things a little bit early today. I want to thank Dawn McIntyre. You are so kind. You've joined us several times. You always ask really interesting questions, and I really want to thank you for that. If you are watching this, I really welcome you to come join me Thursdays, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and during our live stream. And if you miss it, no big deal. Just go to our pages on YouTube or on Twitter or on Facebook, and you can actually look at all of our old live streams and hear me blather on about stuff. So with that, have a great night, and I will see you next week. Love to all.